everybody. Welcome to the Q&A Cafe at home, on your devices, wherever you may be, and our fabulous audience here today at the Georgetown Club. And I have a feeling I know why, because the guest is Margaret Brennan. And I think that of the last year, the guest I'm most often requested to book is Margaret. And I guess there was serendipity in the timing. But what I was also going to say is that while I have interviewed other Sunday show hosts, Tim Russert, Chuck Todd, Chris Matthews, Bob Schieffer, George Stephan, blah, 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 this is the first time I'm actually interviewing the person I work for. In fact, Margaret and I started our morning today texting as she does with, and we have a staff table here. We've got a great turnout from Face the Nation. Hi, guys. And we'll talk about that, how you do what you do. But I want to talk to you a lot about yourself, too. But I think a lot of people are here to hear about what's happening right now with Ukraine. And I think there's an expression that we use in Washington, how close we are to midnight. How close are we to midnight?
Well, it's incredible to see all of you. People in person is still kind of surprising to me, by the way. And thanks, this is a Face the Nation table. Mary Hager and all of our producers. And Shani and Kelsey and Laura.
Yeah, Laura.
I thought Laura was going to get up and fix the speaker in a second, because she's our tech manager. And Laura and Hugo.
Real TV, I said, no, it's not.
I knew you'd be attuned to that. But first of all, you are such an incredible part of Face the Nation and making us able to do what we do every week, and the incredible lineup of people. So you are a powerhouse in and of yourself. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Margaret. Please. Thank you.
But in terms of where we are, well, the president, I believe, is supposed to be speaking right now to the country. And we know Antony Blinken and Ukraine's foreign minister are speaking around 3 o'clock today. The Ukrainian foreign minister was supposed to be making addresses here in Washington. Everything was called off. There's this reshuffling of the deck, and overnight, the calculation that the United States will use this as fully an invasion, not necessarily what the military is viewing as the end game here for Vladimir Putin, but they are looking to respond with some real force in terms of sanctioning. There are a number of things that haven't yet been responded to. The cyber attack, if you remember from last week, that was carried out and attributed to Ukraine. The United States hasn't at least said if they responded yet. That's one of the boxes to check. There's also what just happened in terms of the recognition of these two breakaway republics as part of Russia. That appears to be where Vladimir Putin is heading, from saying they're independent to saying they're part of his country. He's speaking as well, or has spoken within the past 30 minutes. It's been very busy, by the way, all morning long, following all of this. So we're in the midst of it, and I think there's still figuring out the calculation. I think it's safe money to bet that Tony Blinken won't be getting on that plane to meet with Sergei Lavrov later this week, in terms of where the White House is falling in its calculation on how to treat this. But that's changing because they're not quite sure exactly where Vladimir Putin will end up. Could this be the slow strangulation of just using force as coercion for diplomacy, slowly choking off Ukraine's economy, eventually, replacing the government? I mean, there's literally so many scenarios that have been played out. And I think when we talk on television, often people just think of the 1941 scenario of tell me when the tanks cross and the planes fly. And in some ways, that's the way the administration has been communicating. Antony Blinken literally said that over the weekend. But we're in it already, and this hybrid warfare is something that is phase one in the view of the United States military, transitioning to phase two of an invasion. So we are in it right now.
Is the fluidity and the shifting of everything typical, to be expected? Or is this an extraordinary situation that we're in, and we shouldn't be comparing it to any other time?
I think this is incredibly extraordinary. And so for a lot of reasons. First, this is the largest foreign policy crisis that President Joe Biden has faced in his time in office. This is a president who sold himself on the campaign trail on the merits of his foreign policy experience. And specifically, Ukraine has been one of his specialty areas. He had this portfolio in the Obama administration. There's a lot of baggage, let's use that euphemism, that goes with Ukraine throughout the past few years, the impeachment crisis and the like. But this has been a portfolio that he was very invested in. And in fact, yesterday I was looking at where he was in those debates back in the Obama administration. And based on what's been publicly reported, he was one of the voices in the room pushing for example, lethal aid to go to the Ukrainians during the Obama administration, which was not something the administration was willing to do at that time when Vladimir Putin did annex Crimea. And that's where the Ukrainians will say, hey, stop talking about the invasion that might happen. It happened. Part of our country was taken, they would say, the southern part of it, and this fighting in the east. So it's interesting to see now President Biden face a scenario where it's kind of this, it's where that story started when he was in the White House as vice president, and now as president he has to make some key decisions about how to face off versus Vladimir Putin. I think it's really interesting how the administration has framed this as the broader tussle between democracy and autocracy, that this is a test case for where the world is going, what China might do next. I mean, there are high consequences here beyond the questions of whether our institutions work anymore.
Speaking of Biden, the strategy that he is using of sort of forecasting Putin's plans, that I don't know if that's exactly how you would describe it, but he's had this tactic of saying this is what they're going to do, this is they're going to invade on February 16th. Is that pulling any game from Putin or not being very effective? What is, I've never seen a president do this kind of strategy before, so I'm just wondering.
It's really fascinating. And it is unique in that Russia has used disinformation and information warfare so effectively, you could argue, over the past few years, and that the administration has made the choice to be really quick in their declassification, which is to say, we know where you're going with this, in hopes of also helping to keep all allies on board and to not allow for some confusion, so to speak, or spin. I mean, remember, we kind of brush off the United Nations so often because they end up being a toothless body more often than not, but it still has a voice. When you stand on that global stage, there are plenty of countries who, might be willing to go along with the idea of
I think yesterday
information
was
is presented to them.
First time in a long time I've heard our UN ambassador, get traction, make news, that she was.
Right, and Russia has the presidency of Security Council and a veto. You know that what's going to happen there isn't going to make a difference, but in terms of the public understanding of what's happening, they've leaned very heavily into trying to communicate what they anticipate next. That's fascinating, and I think that's really interesting as sort of a separate conversation about how they've approached the Director of National Intelligence's job, Avril Haines, and her decision to do some of that. It shows some understanding and adjustment to how Vladimir Putin has changed the kind of warfare or warfare as we think of it in particular.
Does Biden have the team he needs? Does he have what he needs? I mean, for me, from my point of view, all of them all look so young anyway, but but I don't know the answer to this. If he has the layers and depths of experience that he has the most experience probably of anybody there, over the years. How do you think he and Putin are matched?
That's
if you don't mean to put you on the spot.
I know.
No, and you don't have to. I mean, you're a journalist, but I'm just curious.
I do think there's something interesting to the idea of the foreign policy president in this role, who has so much experience with Ukraine and with Russia. But Vladimir Putin, I mean, I don't have to tell you, has had this job consistently for decades. He believes he knows the United States, and he believes he knows our flaws, our weaknesses, and the areas to exploit. So certainly I'm sure he's pretty confident he knows his adversary in this situation.
Does our current political situation play to his advantage? I mean, is he doing this now because of us or because of Ukraine or because of him?
It's a very good question, and it's something that I think I've asked that question of many experts and officials, and I think the answer I get back, including from people in the administration, is it's a mix of things. You know, obviously, current administration officials will get their backup if you draw a direct line to what happened in Afghanistan, and say the clock didn't start then. This was a long-term plan. Sure. Is there a perception of America as a spent force? Hard to argue that wasn't adding on top of an assessment that Vladimir Putin may have already had. But it didn't start in August, right? Like, if you look at the choking off of Ukraine and the attempt to try to recapture, as Russia would present it, recapture. I mean, literally, the award for the ambassador who we had on had the medal of recapturing the Crimea, retaking the Crimea. And the Ukrainians would say, no, absolutely not. It's not retaking, it's not yours.
Yeah.
But that's been a long-term plan. There was a really fascinating sort of take on this in the Journal about this is Vladimir Putin's revenge for all of the embarrassments of the Soviet Union and the international agreements that came after it. Again, can't get inside his head, but it certainly appears that way. It certainly appears to be really poking holes in the fissures that have become very obvious in NATO, all sorts of international agreements over the past few years. So it is taking advantage of the moment we're in. I also think it's interesting if you look at the things that on disinformation, Russia has had a history of seizing on those weaknesses in our society.
In our history, right.
If you look at the Mueller report and you read that, I mean, from the Intelligence Committee's breakdown of a lot of this, race was one of the things that Russian bots seized on. I mean, go for some of the most divisive, sensitive issues in American society, they've got our number on those things. So I do think that's interesting as well.
Is COVID in any way our number right now?
So it is, again, I mean, it's so funny. You know, we had Fiona Hill on the program a while ago, and oh yeah,
yeah.
Oh, she's fabulous. But
she's
she's a former intelligence analyst.
Yeah,
and she said something, and others have said it too. Like, I cover countries like this. I don't live in countries like this. When she was looking at January 6th, I still have these flashbacks as if I was in a UVA classroom. Like, if you were diagramming a society in the middle of something or on the verge of something, we check so many of those boxes of necessary but not sufficient things. But COVID is certainly one of those things that has exploited all those fissures that existed. It didn't cause them, it added to them. We know that. Does it look like we are weak because of our country's unique experience going through that? That's another factor potentially. It's not like COVID didn't hit Russia. It did. In fact, their vaccine hasn't been all that successful, or they didn't have very high uptake, if you read a lot of the reporting, because of distrust of their own government in taking Sputnik. So broadly speaking, I think we are in this period of tumultuousness of our world sort of figuring out what the rules of the road will be, right? Whether it's you frame it in democracy versus autocracy, or just you have so much disillusionment with institutions and with governments. And that's not unique to the United States. It's happening in the United Kingdom. It's happening around the world. So,
but we're the superpower, so we're the bright, shiny object.
We always think it's about us.
Well,
Americans do that. We always think it's about us.
Well, and Putin probably thinks it's about him, so we're...
Well, for him, I think a lot of it is about us, too. It's not just NATO, it's about us.
Speaking of your sources and whatnot, let's take everybody kind of behind the scenes into the process, because while you host a Sunday show, it's not like you wake up on Saturday morning, read the papers, and then come in and ask some questions.
Isn't it funny when you have to explain that to people?
I would say, having come from a daily TV show, and you've done that, I probably work more days now. Not complaining, Mary, but the process of putting a daily show or a Sunday show together, because it is sort of that last bastion of sober conversation in television, is that we have to prepare so much more strenuously. And so to that end, with a story like this, that's so huge, and it's in your lane because you're a foreign policy expert, how many people are you talking to? How many people are you talking to on the record? How many people off the record? Do you find people who speak to you off the record that it all completely surprises you that they're willing to, but it helps you? Just take us into the process and what a day might be like for you, say today, because you may even have a piece on the evening news tonight. So,
right.
You know.
Probably will. We'll see. One of the things I love about Carol is that she doesn't have an off switch, which is completely, no, I mean that in a great way, is completely necessary for journalism. It may not be the healthiest field of work for any of us, frankly.
Work from home means I'm often booking from my bed, so it's okay.
No, but you know what I mean.
Yeah,
like you're
and it's
always
the same for you, all of us. Yeah.
Thinking of where is this going next, right? That's what journalists have to do, and that's where we are every day of the week leading up to Sunday. Is where does the story go next, and where will we be by Sunday? Because as we learned through the Trump administration in particular, with the velocity of news, what happened Monday might not even be remembered on Sunday.
It's not even news.
Right. So that has changed, I think, for all of us. What might have been a Sunday show pace a few decades ago, maybe even a decade ago, is not the Sunday show pace now.
Right.
It's certainly not for our program.
Right.
And so I'm constantly talking to people to try to understand where the story's going next. Certainly in the midst of a crisis like this, have to talk and try to get people to speak off the record sometimes, but you always want them to go on background so you can actually use the information.
Who are your most valuable sources, do you think? I'm not asking you to name names. No. I'm not asking you to name names, but in what areas are they? Or can they be everything? I mean, is it?
I think it can be everything, and that's how I think of it, because I spent so much time in financial news at the beginning of my career, and that was one of the things that made me end up liking financial news more than I thought I would in the beginning. I mean, I was a foreign affairs, Middle East studies major, an Arabic minor. I had nothing to do with financial news. My dad had worked on Wall Street all my life. That was my exposure, but I soon realized that it's one of the best beats or parts of sections of the newspaper, so to speak, because it connects all the other ones, right?
Exactly.
If you are a trader or investor or an economist, you are not just looking at percentages and dollar signs. You are looking at trends. You're figuring out how the world's changing and where it's going. If you're trading the price of oil, if you're long-term investing, and so that's how. I've also realized, not just reading that section of the newspaper, but talking to economists or I was reading an oil analyst report today, and getting a sense of where the sort of story will be on that front, not so much just from sanctions, but what's happening with this conflict and the impact on inflation, right? And then that's going to impact certainly the White House, where inflation is going. So I think we falsely put these walls up between lanes and lanes,
right? And
when they really do connect.
They cross over
hugely.
Don't you feel, especially given your background, CNBC, Bloomberg, and your education, which was heavily in foreign policy, so these lanes merged for you, but that wasn't the way it was 20 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago. But now, does it seem to you that to be an effective foreign policy journalist, you need to also understand economy and vice versa? That if a person's going to go into, just look at CNBC this morning, because I know we were both watching it. A good half hour of it was on foreign policy. It was on Ukraine, on China.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that way before. It would be like, let's go to our foreign, the person who was reporting foreign policy wasn't asked to discuss economics.
Well, but look at what's happening right now. What is the Biden White House saying? What the Trump White House and Obama White House say? They don't want to use tanks and planes. They want to use financial warfare. That has been the preferred method of U.S.
Is that
foreign
cyber?
policy
Is that
for years.
the same thing as cyber?
That's sanctions. That's sanctions and that's tariffs, right? And that's they don't want to physically, personally go after the oligarchs, but if you read that, statement from the United Kingdom, some of the oligarchs they went after today, it's listing their yachts and their planes and where they're parked.
No, I saw that.
And that is the pressure point. And that, more broadly, about America's role in the world, how long do we keep that dominant spot? It's all wrapped up in the strength and the success of what happens here at home. And if you would, on paper, the Biden administration foreign policy argued so much of its foreign policy was going to be determined by growing the domestic economy, because we have so many problems here. But it's all intertwined.
All intertwined. When did a Sunday show, whether it was Face the Nation or another one, another lesser one, when did it first come on your radar as you were a young journalist or young person? When did you become aware that they even existed?
I don't know exactly. I know that my mom would keep the news on, and it definitely shaped my thinking, because I have like a distinct memory of sitting on the floor in the first house my parents lived in Connecticut, and like drawing and listening to news reports about the war in Lebanon. And asking my mom about it, because I remember saying Lebanon, and she told me, no, it's Lebanon. And, just the things that little kids ask, and you think that those things, I think about this now with my kids, like the stuff that happens in the background, it's not just background noise. Sometimes bits of it get in, however they process it,
Yeah, for my son, it was Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky, so that made very interesting questions.
You left that on? Yeah.
Well, it was on the news, you're driving them to school. It's like,
yeah.
I'm not going to repeat it all here, but Mommy, what's...
Yeah, it impacts them, particularly DC kids, I think.
Yeah, but they're listening.
They are listening.
And you were listening.
And I was listening, and I was reading. I remember reading the Sunday papers a lot, and I loved doing that. But we would talk about things at the dinner table as well. But Sunday shows, I just remember, particularly when I came to CBS, loving being asked to come on Face the Nation. When Mary Hager would ask me to join as, either in the field or the panel of journalists to talk to Bob Schieffer or to talk to John Dickerson, because I just felt like it was the place where, certainly as a viewer, I would tune in, and Bob and John were both great at this, is like, oh yeah, that's what that was all about. When you have news nuggets and you don't kind of add them all up.
Right.
On Sundays, you wanted them all added up. And they were both great at doing that. Here's what it really means and why you need to know. Not in a pedestrian way, but in a big picture, connecting all the dots way. And so I always felt like I had to bring my A game when I sat on that panel. I would get so nervous, and I'd have all my notes and all my deep thoughts, and then you never get to your deep thoughts.
Well, because it moves so fast, just the same.
Right.
It's still TV. Well, you're the 10th moderator of Face the Nation. This is your 4th anniversary as moderator, which is great. Many, many years to come. I remember my first Face the Nation moderator was George Herman, and I remember hearing about him because he and his wife had painted their house in Georgetown like a Poochie scarf. True story.
Wow.
And they lived across the street from the church, from the Episcopal Church on O Street, and the congregation were appalled. And so I thought, well, I've got to check this guy out, right? He's painted his house like a Poochie scarf. And then it was just the most, straight ahead, dry, serious news. It was hard to put George Herman together with the house that was painted like a Poochie scarf. But you come from I think you're only the second woman, right?
Leslie Stahl was the first.
And really in the annals of Sunday shows, it's really been only you and Leslie, or am I missing someone? I know that Dana Bash has started to
on cable.
But
Martha Raddatz fills in.
You are you're still
ABC.
a pioneer, in other words. So you mentioned Connecticut. You grew up in Connecticut. You grew up in Stamford.
I was born in Stamford.
You were born in Stamford.
I grew up in Danbury. I went to school in Greenwich.
And then from Connecticut off to UVA. And we'll just do a little bit of lovey-dovey stuff, but it's a great story. So you met your husband, Yato, and at UVA, and you weren't like impressed. Really? I mean, you liked him, but it wasn't love at first sight.
No, it wasn't. We were just two very different people.
Yeah. You both thought that too.
Yes.
You both had opinions of each other.
I think he told the New York Times, his phrase was, I thought she was too Connecticut. That's
He also used preppy.
yes, which I was like, what is that? I know what I think you mean by that, but I don't know.
But you also thought he was maybe a little too wild.
Oh yeah, he totally was.
So
he was.
I would think the two would go together. But anyway, the irony or a special sweetness to your story is that he ended up proposing to you where you met on the UVA campus, but how many years later?
It's like 14.
And like a very circuitous route. I mean, it's one of those stories that really is serendipity, you know.
Yes, it had to happen at exactly the right moment.
And that you wonder what magic makes you believe in the magic. And then by then, I guess you were no longer too Connecticut, and he was no longer too wild.
No, he was a Marine Corps officer and a lawyer.
Yeah, no, and I know, and you were a serious foreign policy reporter. Also, you bring together two fascinating cultures. I think you give part of it away by your green right here, 'cause you're a very good Irish girl. And his background is Syrian.
He's Syrian American.
And so that creates such an interesting, you have two children, and here you are raising them in Washington. Both parents have these fascinating backgrounds. Have you ever thought, especially going through COVID, and we'll talk about children and COVID in a moment, but do you and Yato ever discuss raising them anywhere else but here? Have you ever, is that ever like, we should go spend a year in Ireland, or we should go spend a year living in the Mideast? Because you both have traveled so much yourselves.
We want our kids to travel a lot.
You've been denied.
I'm scared putting my kids on planes right now.
Yeah.
I don't really see this many people in person, and it's kind of news still because of COVID. I would love for them to be able to travel and travel with us. You know, with our first son, who's now 3.5, we had him on and off planes all the time. And then my second son, who's a pandemic baby, I mean, he hasn't seen like more than half of the family because he was born in the middle of all of this. I mean, I'm not going to lie. During the pandemic, didn't everyone say like, let's move to Fiji? But like, that's not.
Actually, I would have liked that if we could have had the studio moved there.
Right.
Fiji would be good.
I do love Washington, and I think, you know, my husband grew up around here too.
Yeah.
My in-laws are here, and I do think it's a great quality of life, and I think it is actually a great place to raise kids. You know, years ago when I was living and working in New York, and just because New York City was always the city in my backyard, so to speak, I had a hard time imagining living outside of, you know, Manhattan. Like maybe London, but DC has really become home.
But okay, well I get that.
I mean, someday a vineyard somewhere or something.
No. I just think of you both as being so international, and I could see your children. You know, I could see you enjoying but you've got time. They've got many years to.
I mean, Malik, our baby, already has a passport. Yato got it for him.
Yeah, I love that.
Because he's so like, come on.
Yeah, I know. Well, let's talk about that for a moment, because you have gone through something that is a challenge for many parents. Your children are too young to be vaccinated. As you mentioned, Malik is a pandemic baby. He's never known the world any other way but people in masks. Talk about what that's like. It's
well, you know, we talk about it on the show fairly frequently with Dr. Gottlieb, and I get notes often from parents of young children in particular saying thank you, because I do think there is a portion of the public who feels like they've been left behind. And it's interesting because Dr. Gottlieb forecasted a lot of this in the early days, that the vulnerable, the immunocompromised, or those to whom a vaccine
very young and the very old
will live in kind of a parallel experience in some ways. And look, not all parents are like that. I'm aware we are also in a little bit of a bubble here in DC, but because when you look at the numbers, it's only 3 in 10 parents, according to Kaiser, that will actually choose to get these youngest children vaccinated. So I'm aware a lot of parents may not agree with me, but for me, it's definitely been a factor in thinking. It was much harder pre any vaccine while I was pregnant in the middle of this and knowing that I was high risk. Yes.
You really know. You've had the full COVID experience, but fortunately you haven't had COVID, and nobody
Knock on, but that's hard for journalism. It's hard for the work we do because you're supposed to be working as a team, and when you're all separate, it's hard when you're in the midst of the turmoil that we all went through with the violence in the summer of the racial justice protests in Lafayette Square and all those things that were happening late on Saturday nights and coming into the office, or in the midst of January 6th and going through those things. I think all of that, cumulatively, we've been through a lot of trauma. And so I don't mean to say that there's something that is just incredibly unique about having young kids that doesn't recognize all the rest. But it now is so deeply frustrating because when people say, like here in DC, well, we can take our masks off and we can start relaxing some of these things. And you go, well, hey, like, can you just wait till my kid gets a shot in April before you tell everyone to go full bore? It's hard not to think that way.
But you can't do play dates, can you? I mean, well, Eamon's in school, right?
My son is in school. We chose to put him in person. I know people who still don't feel comfortable sending small children in person, but we knew for his socialization, it was incredibly important. His school has great protocols. They started surveillance testing once a week. He masks, and the kids are compliant with that. But that's normal for him. School is a mask. Like, he doesn't know anything else. But he didn't have, during the worst of the pandemic, he didn't have play dates like he normally would. Right. We didn't do the mommy and me classes. All of that was shut down. He needed.
What do you think is the effect of that, though? Do you see anything?
I wonder all the time. I mean, his school is great about this, and in talking to parents about this, they've done some of these classes with parents via Zoom still on talking it through. And frankly, we saw this with our own CBS focus group. Like, a lot of the anxiety, it's not just on them, it's on us. And a lot of it's about us as parents, right? But the number of parents who were like, I just so wonder, did I do something to him by not letting him have play dates? Or, which risk did I choose in the threat matrix that I'm presented with? I think he's adjusting fine. Do I wonder sometimes, he's not as social. Does that mean he's like me and just a little less social at first? That's how I was when I was in preschool. I'd like to observe before I jumped in. Or is that a pandemic thing? I don't know.
But do you see more of yourself or Yado? Can you see these? I think you both have very defined personalities. So do you see them in your children? I mean, do you?
I don't know yet with Malik.
Yeah.
He looks like my husband.
Yeah.
With Eamon, I see a lot of myself.
Yeah. Yeah. Well.
Yeah.
Whatever the shy type.
Well, and he sits and he thinks a lot.
Yeah.
And he holds on to these little nuggets, and then he brings them up, and you're like, when did we even talk about that?
Speaking of the shy type, when CBS approached you about hosting a Sunday show, were you already wanting it, or were you surprised, or were you like, wow, this is a perfect fit for me? Because up until then, you'd been doing reporting. You'd been going out in the field. You'd been, it's a big change in the way you go about doing your work, as we were discussing earlier. Is it, when you took it over, did you immediately feel comfortable in it, or did you have to follow a process of feeling like you owned it? I mean, I watched you on Colbert the other night, and I just thought, and Hugo and I talked about this, is that it just felt to me like for whatever reason, you'd arrived at a moment where you kind of completely owned your subject, your job, everything. Did you feel that?
It was more comfortable than the last 2 times I was on with him, but certainly, no, there was a big adjustment period. I mean, there still is. It's a really difficult job, and it's also in the midst of a really incredibly difficult time, at a pace of news that is just sort of unprecedented. So there was a lot happening there. There's big expectations too, and I remember talking to Mary Hager after one of the auditions, so to speak, after I hosted. I filled in, and Mary had said to me, I think you did a great job. Like, I think it's yours if you want it. And I'm sure I disappointed her because my face was like, ugh. It wasn't like, oh my God. I was like, holy moly. And I didn't know what to do. And it's like, I just had this sort of, let me underreact. Let me process this, like my son does. Let me just think about this for a little bit. But what I had also been very, very early in my pregnancy with my first son. And so that was also in my head of, oh my God, how am I going to do all of this? And you know, there's a lot embedded in that too, of expectation, and you don't want to let anyone down. And then every single time someone said to me, you're only the second woman, I thought, oh, well, just wait, I'm about to have a kid, and you're going to have to watch me go on maternity leave, and you're all going to be really frustrated, but no one's going to say, you know, you have all this stuff that goes in your head.
Right.
That no one ever said to me. No one ever said that. They were only incredibly supportive. Mary was awesome. I remember when I told her, she was like, totally fine, we'll figure it out. We'll handle it. We'll figure it out. And we did. But I'd be lying if I didn't say that's incredibly stressful. And there's a lot of anxiety that goes with trying to balance everything or juggle everything, I should say, all at once.
Well, you worked right up until you had both your babies, so
yes, I interviewed Mike Pence, then Vice President, on my due date, and hosted.
I don't know what to read into that, but
I was just really hoping I didn't go into labor.
Speaking of guests, doesn't have to be Mike Pence. You can take your pick. Do you have, and I'm sure you get asked this question a lot, but do you have interviews that you just harbor as favorites for whatever reason? Because maybe it was unexpected, or you made news, or it was just fun, or you saw a side of a person you didn't expect to see?
Yeah, I think I always think I could do something different or better, or, you know, but there are times when you walk away going, wow, or we learned something. And I think, I mean, you were there in the room when we sat down with Dr. Burks.
Oh, yeah, that was Deborah Burks.
Deborah Burks, after her first interview after leaving the administration. And that was kind of incredible, just to, you know, we talked to her for like 90 minutes or something.
Yeah, but she had quite a story to tell.
She had quite a
story. And you
story.
pulled it out of her very expertly, so it was...
So things like that where you feel like you're learning and experiencing something too, that's one of my favorites.
Making news is fun though too,
Making news is fun.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, it might be a much shorter interview, but you had the Ukrainian ambassador, you know, this past Sunday, and you asked her a question she didn't expect, and it got a very, you know, human reaction, you know, just fearing really for her own life, basically. And I'd been sitting in the green room with her. We were listening to David Martin talk about that there was going to be a high casualty rate in various cities, including Kyiv. And then I said to her, "Where's your family?" And she said, "Kyiv." You know, so this is that. There's that. I mean, we're lucky, I think, when we get to touch that human side of it. But do you feel robbed by time sometimes?
I do.
That you know, it's just. There's nothing we can do about it. I mean, but that, you know, you're just getting somewhere and then it's time's up.
No, I mean, you know that. That's exactly right. And it's a live interview, and, you know, you want to make sure you hit a certain number of topics and you're going through that, you know, knowing you're
live on TV, you have your wonderful colleagues here talking to you, and the clock is... Right. Speaking of guests, I can't not bring it. You already mentioned Scott Gottlieb, but he's an interesting side story of Face the Nation in that he came on once to help us out on understanding COVID when the pandemic first hit. And now he's probably unique in the annals of Sunday show guests in that he doesn't work for us, but he's probably been the person you've interviewed more than anybody else.
And I get where's Scott Gottlieb when he's not on?
Yeah. I think you think of him as Lucky Charm, too.
No, he's great. He is he's a great person. He's also wonderful at being able to do the thing that I think we needed the most in the midst of the panic that was the early stages of the pandemic, in that he can clearly set expectations and analyze and turn medical speak into digestible bits of information. And he was a great guide through, helping to learn this language that was new to all of us throughout. But I think it also, when you talk about feeling different about the show, I do think that the last 2 years of the pandemic, and we've talked about this, and I know Mary Hager would agree, kind of gave us a sense of purpose. And it was, I think, he's a great example of that.
Our commitment
public
to it,
service part of it, because he can give you clear answers that, all the caveats that go with any guest, but he's the first one, he'll say about 5 times in an interview, I'm on the board of Pfizer, okay? And you're like,
I think, isn't it a drinking game out here for very early in the morning? The numbers of
I
time.
love the instinct to fully disclose, but, all of our medical officials in political positions, were also and continue to be confined by the fact that they don't want to kneecap the CDC, so they're not going to criticize them, right, on live TV.
Right.
But Dr. Gottlieb can come up and say, you know what, they're about 5 months too late on this guidance.
He's remarkable, and we're lucky to have him. And he's the first one to say he looks forward to the day when we don't need him, because we'll be beyond this. But on the other hand, it's like we all kind of like him a lot. We only have a few minutes left, and while Colbert didn't get to this, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about step dancing. I am so curious, Margaret. I read that somewhere that you were, I'm not sure if you were a champion step dancer.
Yeah.
I want to know. Tell us about it.
I did Irish step dancing from the time I was 5 until I was 18, and I took classes, towards the end of my career, so to speak, 2 or 3 times a week, and I would be competing regularly, at least once a month. But my mom, I remember her asking me, because I had done ballet from the time I was 3, and she was like, do you want to take Irish step dancing? These other 2 girls in my school were doing it. And I'm Irish American, and it was just also what the other girls in my school were doing. And I did it, and my parents, because I was more shy, didn't think that I would like competing and performing. And they put me up on a stage, and I was nervous, but I loved the competition. And I took to it. And so my dad, carted me up and down the East Coast along with my mom, but for dads who are competitive about sports, my dad got competitive about Irish step dancing, and he would have the scorecards and like tallying up the points for different things. Yeah. But it is an important part of so much of my experience, but it's I'm proud of it. It was so kind of hard to explain to people what that is or was until Riverdance happened when I was 13. And then people are like, oh, that thing.
Yeah. Well, it's like a workout too, I would bet.
Oh my God, I did a piece for a Sunday Morning a few years ago, and I was like, how did I do that? Because I just got up and practiced like one dance with those girls. I was so winded. It's incredible cardio.
No.
It really is. But it's, look, it's changed a lot. It's a little bit jazzier and fancier and sequenced.
Because of Riverdance.
Because of Riverdance. It's got a little bit of a Vegas thing happening. I'm not fully on board with. But
no fishnets, though.
Oh no! I had the velvet costume with the design from the Book of Kells. I mean, you don't get to even design your own costume until you're a championship, so that was a really big deal. I mean, you asked, Carol. I'm not giving you way too much information.
I think it's fascinating, Margaret. I love it. I mean, you may have an Emmy Award and you may have countless other awards, but I just thought, oh my God, this is so cool. She's champion step dancer, and maybe the next time we're on Colbert, we can tip him off and ask him.
Oh God, don't put me on the spot like
that.
No,
but not when there's war going on.
No.
Well, our time is up. This has been marvelous. It's been very awkward, but I think it went well. I mean, not awkward for you. Just it's like I guess next I'll have to have Mary on.
You should.
Yeah, but thank you so much. I know you're having a very busy day, and I'll be talking to you shortly. And tune in to Face the Nation every week. Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you, Carol.